The word was steel. It sliced through the recycled air of the first-class cabin, sharper than the clink of ice in a whiskey glass, more piercing than the condescending snickers that followed. Marcus Sterling, a man whose tailored suit probably cost more than the average American's monthly rent, leaned back in seat 1B, a portrait of entitled arrogance. Take your economy seat, and maybe learn something about earning your place in the world instead of trying to steal it. Phones, like metallic fireflies, had already emerged. Soft red lights blinked. Recording. The cabin was a theater. And Elijah Johnson, 28 years old, CEO of a 9-figure fintech company, was the unwilling star of a passion play about a young black man who had dared to trespass in a sacred space. Heat flooded Elijah's face, a familiar, humiliating burn. But beneath the anger, the word steal had unlocked a door in his memory, a door he kept bolted and chained. The sterile, beige-carpeted airplane cabin dissolved, replaced by the musty scent of old paper and his father's defeated sigh. He was 10 years old, hiding behind the doorway of his father's study. His father, Daniel Johnson, was a brilliant electrical engineer, a man who saw the world in elegant equations and beautiful circuits. He was a gentle giant with hands that could fix anything, from a broken toy to a flawed schematic. That night, those hands were trembling as he packed his life's work into a cardboard box. Standing over him was a man in a crisp suit, his face a smug mask of corporate authority. The man's voice, dripping with false sympathy, echoed in Elijah's memory. "I'm sorry, Daniel, but the evidence is clear. You tried to sell proprietary designs to a competitor. We have no choice but to terminate your employment. The company can't tolerate employees who steal." Elijah remembered the hollow sound of the word in that small, book-lined room. It was a lie. His father had discovered a catastrophic design flaw in the company's flagship product, a flaw the executives wanted to bury to avoid a costly recall. He was going to blow the whistle. They destroyed him first, framing him for a crime he didn't commit, turning his integrity into a weapon against him. His father's career vanished overnight. His name was blacklisted. The shame followed them like a shadow, clinging to their clothes, poisoning their food. They lost their house. His parents' marriage fractured under the strain. His father, a man who had once built worlds with wire and code, ended up stocking shelves at a grocery store, the light in his eyes slowly dimming until it went out for good. The face of the executive from that night was a blur, lost to time and trauma. But the suffocating helplessness, the rage of watching a good man be broken by a lie was identical. It was surging through him now. In this pressurized cabin, 20,000 feet above the earth. He blinked, and the memory receded, leaving behind a residue of cold, diamond-hard resolve. The other passengers saw a young man in a hoodie and sneakers, frozen by public shaming. They were waiting for him to stammer, to retreat, to prove their assumptions correct. They couldn't see the armor that had just clicked into place around his soul. It was armor forged in the fire of his family's ruin, polished by years of navigating worlds that saw him as an anomaly, a threat, or an imposter. His composure wasn't a lack of feeling. It was the absolute focus of a lifetime of pain being channeled into a single, unalterable purpose. He looked at Marcus Sterling, at his smug smile and condescending eyes, and he saw a ghost from a past he had never been able to escape. An internal vow, silent and absolute, formed in his mind. This time, he thought, the calm spreading through him like ice water. The ending will be different. The city spread below Elijah's apartment like a circuit board, a glittering network of light and energy connecting millions of lives. from his vantage point on the 50th floor of a new glass and steel tower in Austin. The world looked orderly, logical, controllable. His apartment was a testament to that same ethos. It was a minimalist expanse of polished concrete floors, stark white walls, and floor-to-ceiling windows. There were no photographs, no sentimental clutter, no personal touches beyond a single, meticulously cared-for bonsai tree on a marble slab. It was the home of a man who had built a kingdom but had no time to live in it, a space that was successful yet sterile, reflecting a life dedicated so entirely to his work that the man himself had become an abstraction. He ended a call with his legal team and immediately dialed another number. An older, familiar face appeared on the large monitor mounted on his wall. Ben Carter, his mentor, was a retired tech executive with a kind, weathered face and eyes that had seen every boom and bust Silicon Valley had to offer for the past 40 years. "Look at you, kid," Ben said, his voice a warm, gravelly rumble. "Sitting on top of the world. Just try not to fall off." Elijah managed a tired smile. "Just trying to hold on." "Ben, we're 24 hours out from the big pitch. 300 million in Series C funding. It's everything." "I know what it is," Ben said, his expression turning serious. "And so do they. Listen to me. Eli, the money guys you're meeting tomorrow, the VCs, the old guard, they don't think like you. They built their empires on handshakes and golf courses. They see a kid like you, brilliant, self-made, running circles around them with algorithms they don't understand. And it scares them. They'll look for any reason, any excuse, to say no. Don't give them one." "I won't," Elijah said, his voice firm. "The tech is flawless. The numbers are undeniable. Finance forward is the future of digital transactions." "It's not the tech I'm worried about. It's the perception," Ben countered. "These men will never see you as an equal. To them, you're a unicorn, a novelty. They'll smile to your face while their guys are in the back room, digging through your trash for a hint of weakness. Be careful." The warning resonated with a low hum of unease Elijah had been feeling for weeks. "We've been having some issues," he admitted, leaning forward. "Strange pings on our servers. Phantom login attempts. Last week, we caught a junior developer, Jennifer Walsh, trying to access our core source code. We fired her. Of course. Our security team traced the breach attempt back to her, but the IP address she used was masked. We couldn't see where the instructions were coming from." Ben's folksy demeanor vanished, replaced by the sharp focus of a seasoned executive. "That's not random. Eli, that's a targeted attack. A former employee. That's corporate espionage 101. Who are your biggest competitors? Who stands to lose the most if you get this funding?" "The old-school credit processing companies," Elijah answered immediately. "Giants like Credit Max Financial. They're dinosaurs. Their infrastructure is ancient. Their fees are predatory. We're eating their lunch. And they know it." "Marcus Sterling's company," Ben said, the name tasting like ash. "He's one of them. Eli. The worst of them. A shark who smells blood in the water. Watch your back. A man like that won't fight you on the merits of your code. He'll fight you in the mud." The conversation left Elijah with a familiar knot in his stomach. The pressure was immense. Hundreds of employees depended on him. Millions of users trusted his platform with their financial lives. The weight of his kingdom was a physical presence, a constant companion that sat on his shoulders and whispered of the catastrophic cost of failure. He walked away from the screen, over to a heavy, fireproof safe tucked discreetly into a wall. He spun the combination and opened it. Inside, nestled amongst corporate documents and hard drives, were a dozen leather-bound notebooks. He lifted one out, its cover worn smooth with age. He opened it to a random page. His father's handwriting, a precise, elegant script, filled the page with complex equations and intricate diagrams. These notebooks were all that was left of Daniel Johnson's genius, the tangible proof of a brilliant mind that the world had tried to erase. Elijah ran his fingers over a diagram for a microprocessing chip his father had designed decades ago. A concept so far ahead of its time, it was only now becoming feasible. His own ambition, the relentless drive that pushed him to work 18-hour days and sacrifice any semblance of a personal life, wasn't just about success. It was about redemption. Every line of code he wrote, every deal he closed, every dollar Finance Forward earned was a stone being laid on the foundation of a new legacy, one that would be too big, too powerful, too undeniable for anyone to tear down. He was rebuilding the family name his father's enemies had turned to ash. He closed the notebook gently, the scent of old leather and ink filling his sterile apartment with a ghost of warmth. Ben was right. The old guard was waiting for him to fail. They saw him as a threat to their established order. But they had no idea who they were dealing with. They saw a young tech CEO. They didn't see the 10-year-old boy hiding behind a door, listening to his father's world collapse, making a silent promise to one day build it back, stronger than before. The calculated attack began not with a shout, but with a murmur. As Elijah made his way down the jet bridge, he could feel the subtle shift in the air, the way the gate agent's professional smile tightened when she scanned his boarding pass. Once on board, at the threshold of the first-class cabin, a flight attendant with a name tag that read Sarah stopped him. "May I see your boarding pass?" "Please," she asked. Her tone was polite, but her eyes did a swift, dismissive inventory: the simple gray hoodie, the clean but unremarkable sneakers, the backpack slung over one shoulder. Elijah handed her his phone. She studied the screen with an intensity no other passenger had received. "Seat 1A, she said, her voice flat, handing it back with a hint of reluctance. "Right this way." He found his seat and began to settle in, pulling his laptop from his backpack. The man in 1B, impeccably dressed in a navy suit, looked up from his newspaper. His silver hair was perfectly coiffed, his face a mask of casual disdain. "It's interesting what passes for the new elite these days," the man said to his companion across the aisle. His voice, a stage whisper, designed to carry all branding, no substance. Elijah ignored him, focusing on the presentation slides for the investor meeting. He'd learned long ago that engaging with such provocations was a losing game. His work would speak for itself. But the provocations didn't stop. They became a steady, low-level hum of aggression. When the flight attendant came to take pre-flight drink orders, she addressed the man in 1B, by name Mr. Sterling. Your usual Glenlivet, but skipped over Elijah entirely, until he flagged her down. When he asked for a bottle of water, she returned and practically dropped it on his tray table, without a word. The pressure was building, a deliberate, orchestrated campaign of microaggressions designed to make him feel unwelcome, to put him on edge. Then came Sarah, the flight attendant. Again. This time her practiced smile was gone, replaced by an expression of stern, bureaucratic authority. "Sir," she announced, her voice loud enough to quiet the surrounding conversations, "I'm going to have to ask you to deplane. There's been a concern raised about the validity of your ticket." Elijah looked up from his laptop. "A concern. I showed you my boarding pass. It was purchased through our corporate travel account." "We've had a number of fraudulent bookings recently," Sarah said, glancing pointedly at Marcus Sterling. "Standard security protocols require us to verify the purchase, especially for a last-minute, full-fare ticket like this one." The accusation hung in the air, fraudulent. The word was a dog whistle, and every passenger in the cabin heard it loud and clear. It played on every stereotype, every unspoken prejudice about a young black man in a space of luxury. "Are you asking every passenger with a full fare ticket for their financial statements?" Elijah asked, his voice dangerously quiet. "Sir, I'm just following procedure," she said, her cheeks flushing. Marcus Sterling seized the opening. "Look, it's a simple security issue," he said, addressing the other passengers. "We all pay a premium for comfort and safety up here. It's not unreasonable to ensure everyone belongs. Given his background, a little extra verification seems prudent." The coded language background. "Belongs" was a masterclass in polite bigotry. It gave the other passengers permission to indulge their biases under the guise of legitimate concern. A woman in the row behind them pulled out her phone and began recording. Elijah felt the trap closing. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was an ambush. He saw the faint, triumphant smirk on Sterling's face and understood. This had been planned. The strange server pings. The ex-employee. Ben's warning, it all coalesced into a single, chilling realization. He hadn't just stumbled into a random act of prejudice. He had walked into a meticulously set trap. And as the cabin doors hissed shut, he knew there was no escape. The performance was about to begin. As soon as the plane touched down in San Francisco, before the seatbelt sign had even pinged off, Elijah's phone was buzzing. He ignored it, his focus entirely on the call he was making. "David, it's Elijah Johnson." The voice on the other end, Delta's Vice President of Corporate Partnerships, was warm and effusive. "Elijah, good to hear from you. I trust your flight was comfortable. We appreciate you choosing us for your team's travel." "Actually, David, my flight was anything but comfortable," Elijah said, his voice level and cold. "I spent the last 5 hours being publicly accused of fraud by your flight crew, at the instigation of a man who happens to be the CEO of my company's chief competitor." There was a stunned silence on the other end of the line. Elijah succinctly recounted the entire event, Sarah's targeted questioning, Marcus Sterling's inflammatory accusations, the other passengers joining in, and the live streaming. "My God," David finally whispered, the sound of furious typing audible in the background. "Flight 447, Sarah Mitchell, Marcus Sterling, Elijah. I am speechless. This is a complete failure on every conceivable level. I promise you, there will be an immediate and thorough internal investigation." "An internal investigation isn't enough, David," Elijah said firmly. "The damage was public. The remedy needs to be public as well." David promised swift action. He assured Elijah that Sarah would be suspended pending the investigation's outcome, and that Delta would issue a formal apology. But, as Elijah disembarked, he saw that the resolution wouldn't be nearly so simple. Marcus Sterling was not being met by federal agents, but by two polite airport security guards who escorted him through a private exit for causing a disturbance. It was a slap on the wrist, not the decisive justice David had implied. As he walked through the terminal, his phone buzzed again. It was his COO, Anya Sharma. Her voice was sharp with urgency. "Eli, are you okay? I've been watching the streams. It's a mess." "I'm fine. Anya, what's the situation?" "Bad," she said bluntly. "The videos have gone viral, but the narrative is all over the place. For every person supporting you, there's another defending Sterling or calling you an opportunist. Pundits on cable news are already spinning it. Some are saying you played the race card for publicity ahead of your funding meeting." Elijah's stomach tightened. He had won the battle on the plane, but the war for public opinion was just beginning. "It gets worse," Anya continued. "Credit Max's PR team is working overtime. They're flooding social media with counter-narratives, painting Sterling as a concerned citizen, and you as an entitled millennial. I did a quick deep dive on Sterling's inner circle. He has a fixer, a crisis management specialist named Richard Vale. The man is notorious. He doesn't just bury stories. He buries careers. He creates chaos, spreads disinformation, and litigates his targets into bankruptcy. This wasn't just a clumsy act of racism. Eli. This was a professional hit. And it's not over. Anya's words confirmed his deepest fears. The humiliation on the plane wasn't the endgame. It was the opening salvo. Sterling wasn't trying to just embarrass him. He was trying to create a cloud of controversy so thick that his investors would run for cover. The threat hadn't been contained. It had just escalated into open warfare. Standing in the sterile, impersonal arrivals hall of SFO, surrounded by strangers, Elijah felt a profound sense of isolation. The kingdom he had built was under siege, and the enemy was already inside the gates. The next 48 hours were a blur of strategic warfare fought on digital battlefields. From a suite at the St. Regis that had become his command center, Elijah and Anya worked relentlessly to connect the dots. The sterile hotel room was littered with laptops, tablets, and takeout containers, the air thick with the hum of technology and the scent of stale coffee. "I've got something," Anya said. Her eyes locked on her screen. She hadn't slept in 2 days, but her focus was unwavering. Jennifer Walsh, the developer we fired for the breach attempt. I ran a full forensic analysis on her financials. 3 days after she was terminated, a wire transfer for $50,000 hit her account. "From who?" Elijah asked, leaning over her shoulder. "A shell corporation based in Delaware. Argent Solutions LLC." Anya read. "Registered 6 months ago. No public profile. No website. A ghost. But I cross-referenced the registration agent's address with other corporate filings." She clicked a few keys, and a network of interconnected entities filled the screen. The same agent is used by a dozen other shell companies, all of which are linked to one man, Richard Vale, Marcus Sterling's fixer. It was the smoking gun. "He paid her to try and steal our source code," Elijah said, the pieces clicking into place. When that failed, they pivoted to this public smear campaign. "He hired her, leaked my travel details, and set the trap on the plane." The confirmation was validating but terrifying. This was a conspiracy, a clear-cut case of corporate sabotage. But as they celebrated their small victory, an email pinged in Elijah's inbox. It was from the legal firm of Latham & Watkins, representing Marcus Sterling. Attached was a formal cease and desist letter, accusing Elijah Johnson of slander, defamation, and malicious interference with Mr. Sterling's business affairs. It demanded a public retraction and apology, threatening a lawsuit that would seek hundreds of millions in damages. "He's preemptively striking," Anya breathed, reading the document over his shoulder. "He's trying to frame us as the aggressors. Vale's fingerprints are all over this." The phone rang. It was the managing partner of Sequoia Legacy, the lead venture capital firm for their upcoming funding round. His name was Robert Miller, a pillar of the investment community. "Elijah," Robert said, his voice strained with a manufactured politeness that set off alarm bells. "We need to talk about this situation. The board has some concerns. The optics aren't great. This controversy, the public nature of it all, it introduces a level of reputational risk we hadn't factored in." "Robert, I was the target of a racist attack and a coordinated corporate sabotage attempt," Elijah stated, keeping his voice even. "We have proof." "I understand that," Robert said coolly. "But what the public sees is a messy, high-profile conflict. Right now, your name is associated with scandal. For a company in the financial sector, Trust is everything. We may need to postpone the funding round until this blows over. The call ended. Elijah stared at the phone, the blood roaring in his ears. Sterling wasn't just attacking his reputation. He was methodically dismantling his company, brick by brick, cutting off its financial oxygen supply right before the most important meeting of its existence. Desperate, he called Ben. He laid out the entire situation: the fixer, the paid-off employee, the cease and desist letter, the wavering investor. Ben listened patiently, his silence more comforting than any platitude. When Elijah finished, Ben let out a long sigh. "I knew a man like Sterling would fight dirty," Ben said. "But this is personal. It feels like more than just business." He paused. "Eli, there's something I should have told you a long time ago. I didn't want to burden you with it. But now, you need to know. I didn't just know of your father. I knew him. We worked together, briefly, at that same company before I left for the valley." Elijah went still. "You knew my father?" "Yes," Ben said, his voice heavy with regret. "I was there. Eli, I was a junior executive when it all went down. I saw what they did to him. Daniel was the most brilliant engineer I ever met, and the most honorable man. He found a fatal flaw in the system's architecture, a flaw that would have cost the company hundreds of millions to fix. The CEO, a ruthless bastard named Alan Pierce, ordered him to bury it. Daniel refused. He was preparing to go to the SEC. So Pierce and his inner circle manufactured the story about him selling secrets. They ruined him to protect their stock price." The story, now told by an eyewitness, hit Elijah with the force of a physical blow. It was one thing to know the narrative of his family's tragedy. It was another to hear it confirmed by someone who had been in the room. "This is about more than finance forward, isn't it?" Elijah said. The question, a statement. "It always has been," Ben confirmed. "You're not just building a company. Son, you're reclaiming your family's honor. You're finishing the fight your father started. Don't let them break you like they broke him." The call ended, but the weight of Ben's words remained. This wasn't a business dispute anymore. It was a crusade, a battle for justice 20 years in the making. And as he stared out at the city lights, Elijah Johnson knew, with absolute certainty, that he would not fail. He owed it to the ghost of the brilliant, broken man whose legacy he carried in his very name. The revelation had rewired the entire conflict, turning it from a corporate rivalry into a blood feud, driven by a new, urgent need to understand the full scope of the past. Elijah spent the night not prepping for his investor meeting, but digging through the digital archives he kept of his father's life. He scanned old company newsletters, performance reviews, and project files, searching for a name, a connection, anything that would link Marcus Sterling to the man who destroyed his father, Alan Pierce. Hours bled into one another. His eyes burned from staring at the screen. Then he found it. Buried in a folder labeled Miscellaneous was a subfolder of scanned photographs from his father's tenure at the company. He clicked it open. There were pictures of team-building exercises, holiday parties, and product launches. And then, one photo stopped his heart. It was from the annual company picnic, dated 20 years ago. The quality was grainy, a relic of early digital photography. In the foreground, his father, Daniel, stood smiling beside a barbecue grill, a spatula in his hand, looking happy and relaxed. But it was the background that made Elijah's blood run cold. Standing just over his father's shoulder, laughing at something Alan Pierce was saying, was a much younger Marcus Sterling. He was clean-shaven, his hair darker, but there was no mistaking the ambitious, predatory glint in his eyes. He was there. The truth hit Elijah with the force of a physical impact, knocking the air from his lungs. Sterling wasn't just a random competitor who saw an opportunity. He wasn't just another member of the racist old guard. He was a direct link to his family's original sin. He had been a witness. He had stood by and watched as an innocent man was sacrificed for corporate greed. The public humiliation on the plane, the sabotage, the calculated attack on his company. It wasn't just business. It was personal. It was a ghost trying to bury the last living reminder of his crime. He immediately sent the photo to Anya. "I need to know everything about Marcus Sterling's time at Omnicorp from 20 years ago." 10 minutes later, Anya's voice came through the speakerphone, hushed with shock. "Oh my God. Eli. I found him. He's in the old personnel files." Marcus Sterling was a rising star at Omnicorp back then. He was a senior project manager, reporting directly to the vice president of engineering, and his official company mentor. The executive who championed his career was Alan Pierce. The confirmation settled in the quiet hotel room like a shroud. This was a generational battle. Pierce had destroyed the father, and now his protege, Sterling, was trying to destroy the son. The plane incident wasn't just Sterling trying to wound a competitor. It was an attempt to reenact the original crime, to put another Johnson in his place, to publicly brand him as a fraud, a thief who didn't belong the very same accusations they had leveled against his father. The entire conflict was reframed. This was no longer about securing funding or winning market share. It was about justice. It was about looking a ghost from the past in the eye and making him answer for the ruin he had helped create. The meeting tomorrow wasn't just a pitch to investors anymore. It was a trial. And Elijah Johnson was no longer the defendant. He was the chief prosecutor. The morning of the meeting. The final blow landed. An article appeared on a widely read, notoriously cynical tech blog under the headline, "Finance Forward's Future of Finance, Built on a Foundation of Sand." The piece, written by a blogger known for his cozy relationships with established corporations, cited a leaked internal memo from a concerned former employee. The memo, carefully doctored and full of technical-sounding jargon, alleged critical security flaws in Finance Forward's core architecture, suggesting that user data was vulnerable and that the company's entire platform was a house of cards. It was a classic short and distort scheme, a tactic used to drive down a company's valuation right before a major financial event. The story spread like wildfire through the niche financial news outlets that the venture capitalists all read. The panic was immediate. Robert Miller, the lead investor, called again, his voice now frigid. "Elijah, I have 5 board members asking me if we're about to invest $300 million into the next Theranos. You need to address this. The entire first half of the meeting will now be dedicated to you assuaging our security concerns." Marcus Sterling's trap was perfectly set. He had successfully shifted the narrative. Elijah would be forced to walk into the most important meeting of his life on the defensive, looking weak, unprepared, and untrustworthy. He would spend his precious time refuting baseless accusations instead of presenting his vision for the future. Ben called, his voice tight with anger. "He's got you cornered. Eli, we have to fight back now. Leak the photo. Leak the proof that he paid off Jennifer Walsh. Go to the press. Expose him for the conspirator he is. Burn him to the ground before he burns you." It was the logical move, the easy win. Exposing Sterling publicly would discredit the hit piece and turn Elijah into a sympathetic victim, a David fighting a corrupt Goliath. The investors would rally behind him. But as Elijah looked at the grainy photograph of a young Marcus Sterling smiling beside the man who destroyed his father, something inside him hardened. A public expose would be messy. It would make him a martyr. but it would also forever tie his company's story to Sterling's villainy. It would be a victory in the court of public opinion, an arena of fleeting outrage and shifting loyalties. He wanted more. "No," Elijah said, his voice resolute. "No," Ben asked, incredulous. "Eli, this is not the time for high-minded principles. This is a street fight." "And I'm going to win it," Elijah replied. "But not in the street. I'm going to win it in the boardroom. That's the arena where they believe power is decided. That's where the old guard feels safe. I'm not just going to beat Marcus Sterling. I'm going to execute him. Professionally. In front of the very people whose validation he craves. I'm going to let him walk into that meeting thinking he's the smartest man in the room. I'm going to let him deliver the killing blow. Right before I show everyone that the weapon he's holding is pointed directly at his own head." He was refusing to play Sterling's game. He was creating his own. It was an immense gamble, a high-wire act with no safety net. But it was a strategy born of absolute confidence, not just in his technology, but in his purpose. He wasn't just fighting for his company anymore. He was fighting for his father's name. And that was a battle he could not, would not, lose. The boardroom of Sequoia Legacy was a temple of modern capitalism, located on the top floor. Its glass walls offered a panoramic view of Silicon Valley, a landscape of manicured campuses and untold wealth. The air was cool and sterile, the silence broken only by the soft clicks of pens on notepads. The investors, a collection of men and one woman in expensive, understated suits, sat around a massive obsidian table, their faces polite, but their eyes skeptical. This was the arena. Anya sat beside Elijah, a silent pillar of support, her laptop open and ready. At the head of the table, Robert Miller cleared his throat. "Elijah, thank you for joining us. As you know, some concerns have been raised. Before we proceed with your presentation, we've taken the liberty of inviting an independent industry expert to offer his assessment of the security allegations against Finance Forward. Please welcome Marcus Sterling." It was a masterful power play. Sterling strode into the room with the easy confidence of a predator entering his own territory. He shook hands with the partners, a picture of gravitas and concern. He was no longer the aggressor. He was the wise elder, the impartial expert there to protect the investment community from a reckless upstart. He took his place at the table, nodding curtly at Elijah, a flicker of triumph in his eyes. For the next 30 minutes, Marcus delivered a polished, devastating presentation. He used the doctored memo as his foundation, weaving a narrative of technical incompetence and deceptive practices. He spoke of systemic vulnerabilities, unencrypted data streams, and a culture of cutting corners. He never raised his voice, his tone one of sober, reluctant disappointment. He was, by all appearances, a man simply doing his due diligence. "In my professional opinion," he concluded, looking directly at the investors, "an investment in Finance Forward at this stage would not be prudent. The reputational and financial risks are, frankly, unacceptable." The atmosphere in the room grew heavy. The investors shifted uncomfortably, their polite skepticism hardening into genuine doubt. The trap had been sprung. Robert Miller turned to Elijah. "Elijah, your response." Elijah stood up calmly. He didn't walk to the podium. He remained at his seat, his presence filling the space. He looked around the table, meeting each investor's gaze. "Thank you, Mr. Sterling, for that performance," he began, his voice quiet but resonant. "I could spend the next hour refuting your technical claims with data, and I will. But first, I want to talk about the true cost of doing business. I want to tell you a story." A ripple of confusion went through the room. 20 years ago, Elijah continued, there was a brilliant engineer named Daniel Johnson. He was a man of immense integrity who worked for a company called Omnicorp. He discovered a fatal flaw in their flagship product, a flaw that would have endangered consumers and bankrupted the company. His superiors ordered him to cover it up. He refused. So, they destroyed him. They fabricated evidence that he was trying to sell company secrets. They fired him, blacklisted him, and ruined his life to protect their bottom line. That engineer was my father. The room was utterly silent. Marcus Sterling's face had gone rigid, his polite mask beginning to crack. For 20 years, I have carried the weight of that injustice, Elijah said, his voice gaining strength. And for 20 years, the men responsible have lived with the knowledge of what they did. Men who learned their trade at the feet of executives like Alan Pierce. As he spoke, he nodded to Anya, the massive screen behind him, which had displayed Sterling's damning charts and graphs, flickered to life. It was now filled with a single, grainy photograph, the company picnic, Daniel Johnson at the grill, and standing in the background, smiling next to Alan Pierce, was a young Marcus Sterling. Elijah turned his gaze directly on Sterling, his eyes like chips of obsidian. You weren't just a competitor trying to sabotage my company before a funding round. Mr. Sterling, you were there. You stood by, and you watched as my father was ruined. This was never about market share. This was about you trying to bury the last living reminder of what your ambition cost my family. Sterling shot to his feet, his face pale, his composure shattered, cornered and exposed. He lashed out, not with a denial, but with a justification that damned him completely. Your father wasn't a saint. He spat, his voice raw with decades-old fury. He was a naive fool. He was about to go public with a design flaw that would have bankrupted the company and put thousands of people out of work. I did what I had to do. Alan Pierce did what he had to do to protect our employees, our shareholders. Your father was a reckless ideologue who would have sacrificed everything for his own ego. The confession hung in the air, more damning than any accusation Elijah could have made. He had not only admitted his presence and complicity, but had revealed the rotten, pragmatic core of his philosophy. The investors stared at him, their faces a mixture of shock and disgust. In that moment, Elijah faced a choice. His father was a hero, a whistleblower. But Sterling's outburst had introduced a sliver of complication, a hero who might have caused immense collateral damage. He could use this to destroy Sterling completely, to paint him as a monster without nuance. He could pursue pure, destructive revenge. Or he could demonstrate a better way. The silence in the boardroom was absolute. Every eye was on Elijah, waiting to see how he would deliver the final, killing blow. Marcus Sterling stood panting, exposed and cornered, his confession echoing off the glass walls. Elijah paused, letting the weight of the moment settle. He looked not at the ruined man before him, but at the stunned faces of the investors. He took a deep breath. My father believed that integrity was not a variable to be weighed against profit margins, he said, his voice clear and steady. He believed it was an absolute. He was willing to sacrifice everything for that principle. So am I. That is the foundation of Finance Forward. He turned back to Marcus Sterling, his expression not of triumph, but of a deep, resonant certainty. You see risk in integrity. I see it as the ultimate firewall. Then, with a quiet nod to Anya, he pivoted. The screen behind him changed from the damning photograph to a live, Real-time diagnostic of Finance Forward's security architecture. Now, Elijah said, his tone shifting to that of the confident, commanding CEO, let's talk about the actual security of my platform. For the next 15 minutes, he flawlessly and brutally dismantled every single claim Sterling had made. He brought up lines of code, encryption protocols, and penetration test results. He demonstrated, with irrefutable data, that the leaked memo was a work of pure fiction. He didn't just defend his company. He showcased its technical superiority with an effortless brilliance that left no room for doubt. When he finished, the investors were no longer stunned. They were deeply, profoundly impressed. They had witnessed more than just a brilliant technical presentation. They had seen a leader with an unshakable moral core, a man who had faced down a ghost from his past and refused to be defined by his enemy's tactics. He had chosen integrity over vengeance, competence over chaos. Robert Miller was the first to speak, his voice filled with a new, genuine respect. Elijah, the board and I, we're in. He slid a term sheet across the table. We're not investing $300 million. We're doubling it to $600. And we would be honored if you would accept a seat on our advisory board. The war was over. Marcus Sterling sank back into his chair. A man utterly ruined. The story of what happened in that boardroom would become a legend in Silicon Valley, a tale of sabotage, redemption, and the day a young CEO taught the old guard the true meaning of power. 3 months later, the world looked different. Finance Forward was the darling of the tech industry, hurtling toward a multi-billion-dollar IPO. The name Elijah Johnson had become synonymous with a new kind of leadership, brilliant, resilient, and ethically uncompromising. But the final victory wasn't to be found on the floor of the New York Stock Exchange. Elijah stood at a podium on the campus of his alma mater, Stanford University. The autumn sun was warm on his face. Behind him, gleaming new letters on a handsome brick building spelled out the Daniel Johnson Center for Corporate Ethics, funded with a $10 million personal endowment from Elijah. The center was a nonprofit dedicated to providing legal support and protection for corporate whistleblowers. Ben and Anya stood in the front row, beaming. Elijah's speech was short and powerful. It wasn't about revenge or victory. It was about building a future where no one would have to suffer the way his father had. It was about ensuring that integrity in the corporate world had a powerful, well-funded ally. My father's name was once erased from history by men who feared the truth. He told the crowd of students, faculty, and journalists. Today, his name will be a sanctuary for it. As he stepped down from the podium, a young woman approached him tentatively. She looked to be in her early 20s, her expression a mixture of nervousness and resolve. "Mr. Johnson," she asked, "my name is Emily. I'm Sarah Mitchell's daughter." Elijah paused, recognizing the name of the flight attendant. "I just wanted to tell you, my mom lost her job at Delta," Emily said, her voice quiet. "She deserved it. But what you did, it changed her. She spent the last few months in retraining, and she now volunteers for an organization that teaches anti-bias practices to corporate employees. She wanted me to give you this." She handed Elijah a crisp, sealed envelope. He opened it. Inside was a single sheet of paper, filled with neat, handwritten script. It was a letter from Sarah Mitchell. It wasn't an excuse or a justification. It was a sincere, deeply personal apology for her prejudice, her weakness, and the pain she had caused. She wrote that his refusal to be diminished had forced her to confront a part of herself she had never wanted to see. Elijah read the letter, a complex wave of emotions washing over him. He folded it carefully and put it in his jacket pocket. He looked at the young woman and nodded. For the first time in what felt like a lifetime. A genuine, unburdened smile touched his lips. He had not only won his battle and reclaimed his father's name, but his stand had created a ripple of positive change, transforming even those who had stood against him. He thanked Emily, then turned to leave. Ben and Anya falling into step beside him. He had a car waiting to take him to the airport for a flight to New York. As he settled into the plush leather of the back seat, he felt a lightness he hadn't known was possible. The weight of the kingdom was still there, but it no longer felt like a burden. It felt like a responsibility he was finally strong enough to carry. The final shot of his journey was quiet, almost mundane. He walked onto the plane, handed his boarding pass to a smiling flight attendant, and made his way to his seat. 1A. He stowed his bag, sat down, and looked out the window, ready for the ascent. This time, there were no whispers, no challenges, no questions. There was only the quiet, comfortable, and undisputed reality of a man who was exactly where he belonged.